Crying at your boss's desk at 11 p.m. while rose petals scatter across the floor between you wasn't exactly how I planned my Tuesday. That's where this story ends up. But to understand why Tiffany Monroe was sitting in that chair, eyes wet, spine straight, staring at a man who had never once raised his voice and somehow made that worse, you have to go back 3 weeks. You have to go back to the beginning of something that neither of them ever officially started. If you've ever worked for someone who acted like they owned you without ever saying why, stay with me. This one's going to make sense before it's over. Tiffany Monroe was not the kind of woman who needed to be noticed to know her own worth. She had figured that out early. Somewhere between her second promotion and the third time, a colleague tried to take credit for her work in a boardroom and watched it not stick. She was 27, sharp in the way that came from paying attention when other people assumed nobody was, and she had built her reputation at Seo Group's New York office the same way she built every event she coordinated, quietly, precisely, and without leaving room for anything to go wrong. Her title was Senior Events Coordinator. Her actual job was closer to invisible architect. She was the woman who arrived before anyone else and left after the last light was turned off. She was the one vendors called when they had a problem they didn't want escalating, because Tiffany had a way of resolving things before they became stories. She knew which caterers ran late and which ones ran early and which ones ran exactly on time but brought the wrong linens, and she had contingencies for all three. She knew how to read a room before it was full and identify every possible point of failure before the first guest arrived. She was, by every measurable standard, exceptional at what she did. And she had spent 14 months working directly under a man who seemed to understand that better than anyone in the building, which should have been a straightforward professional arrangement and would have been if Jae-won Seo were a straightforward man. He was not. Jae-won Seo was 32 years old and ran the New York satellite branch of Seo Group with the kind of focused precision that made new hires question whether they had accidentally walked into the wrong industry. He was not the kind of executive who filled a room with noise. He was the kind who walked in and the noise rearranged itself around him. He dressed in dark, well-cut suits every single day without variation, and the ink that climbed his neck above his collar told a story that his professional demeanor never would. Nobody in the office asked about it. That particular silence was its own form of respect. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. When Jae-won Seo wanted something done, he said so once, and the particular quality of that once was enough to make people move with a kind of focused urgency they couldn't always explain afterward. He wasn't harsh, he wasn't unreasonable. He was exact, and exactness, Tiffany had learned, could be its own kind of pressure. In 14 months of working under him, she had learned the shape of his expectations the way you learn the layout of a room you spend a lot of time in, not by studying it, but by moving through it enough times that your body just knows. She knew which decisions he wanted brought to him and which ones he trusted her to make alone. She knew that he reviewed every event brief she submitted, every one, though he rarely commented unless something needed changing. She knew that his silence on a proposal meant approval, and that his one-line responses meant he had questions he was deciding whether to ask. What she also knew, though she filed it away in a part of her mind she didn't visit often, was that Jae-won Seo had turned down 3 separate requests to transfer her to other departments over the course of her tenure. She found out about the first one by accident. Through a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear in a hallway she was walking through for entirely legitimate reasons. The other 2 she pieced together from the absence of thing. Offers that should have come and didn't, conversations that seemed to have started somewhere above her and then simply stopped. She knew that he had never once had to be told how she took her coffee, and that there was always a cup on the corner of whatever workspace she was using when she arrived on heavy event days, and that she had made the decision, deliberately and with full awareness, to never comment on it. She knew that at every event she coordinated, regardless of whether his attendance was professionally required, Jae-won Seo appeared somewhere in the room, not at the front, not in a position of visibility. He stood near the back or to the side. And he watched the event the way someone watches something they had a hand in building, with a quiet, particular attention. She had told herself for 14 months that it was professional oversight. He was the branch director. Her events represented the company. It made sense that he would monitor them. She almost believed it. Her rule, the one she had set for herself sometime in the second month and renewed quietly every few weeks since, was simple. Don't let it matter. She had built her career carefully, on her own terms, and she was not about to let the complicated geometry of whatever was or wasn't happening in her boss's head become something that took up space in hers. She was Tiffany Monroe. She had work to do. So she did the work. And it was good work. And she kept the rule. And for 14 months, more or less, it held. The SEO Group Annual Industry Gala was the single most important event on the company's New York calendar. It was the event that set the tone for the business year, the one that clients, partners, and competitors attended, that got written about in trade publications, that the Seoul headquarters reviewed photographs from afterward. Getting it right was not optional. Getting it perfect was the baseline. Tiffany had been assigned lead coordinator 6 weeks out, which was standard, and she had spent those 6 weeks building something she was genuinely proud of. The venue was a converted event space in Midtown, the kind of place with good bones and enough square footage to allow for the separate conversation areas and presentation zones the evening required. She had mapped every table, every lighting setup, or every transition in the evening's program. She had vendor confirmations, backup vendor confirmations, a run-of-show document that accounted for 3 possible weather scenarios and 1 audiovisual failure. She was 3 days before the event, exactly where she needed to be. And then, the Luo Enterprises bid appeared. It surfaced through industry channels, a competing proposal for the same venue partnership contract that Seo Group was in the final stages of closing. Luo Enterprises was the name attached to it. Damien Luo's company. They were the kind of rival that didn't announce themselves until the moment it would cost them most, and the timing of this particular move was not accidental. Tiffany heard about it the way she heard about most things, not through official channels, but through the ambient information that moved through a well-run office if you knew how to listen. She registered it, noted that it was Jae-won's problem to solve and not hers, and returned to her run-of-show document. But she noticed, because she noticed everything, that the light in Jae-won's corner office was on past midnight that night, and the next night, and she didn't say anything about it because it wasn't her place and because she had a rule, but she noticed. The pre-event venue walkthrough was scheduled for Thursday afternoon, 2 days before the gala. Tiffany arrived early as she always did, with her printed floor plan and her phone open to her coordination checklist, and she walked the space methodically, speaking with the venue manager, confirming load-in times, checking the sight lines from the presentation area. She was mid-conversation with the lighting technician when she heard a voice behind her that she did not recognize. "You mapped the conversation areas to the left of the main room. That's a good instinct. Most coordinators put them at the back and then wonder why nobody uses them." She turned. Damien Luo was not what she expected, which was the first indication that she should have been more careful. He was tall, unhurried, dressed in charcoal with an open collar, and he was looking at her floor plan with the genuine interest of someone who actually understood what they were looking at. He introduced himself with a handshake and a directness that felt almost disarming in its simplicity. No performance, no excessive warmth, just, "Here is who I am. I assume you know the name." She did. She also knew he had absolutely no reason to be at a SEO Group venue walkthrough, and she said so, politely but without apology. He smiled, not defensively, and said he was meeting with the venue manager separately, that their paths had simply crossed, and that he hoped she didn't mind if he introduced himself since they were likely to be occupying adjacent professional space for some time. She was professional. She was measured. She answered his questions about the space with the economy of someone who was working and knew it. But he was perceptive, and he asked smart things, and at one point he said something about the flow of the room that was genuinely insightful, and she responded to the insight rather than the person making it, because that was the kind of person she was. And then he said something that made her laugh. She didn't plan to. It wasn't a significant laugh, a brief quiet sound, gone almost immediately, but it was real, and she registered its realness with a small private awareness. She did not notice in that moment that Jae-won Seo had arrived for the walkthrough and was standing on the opposite side of the room. She did not see the way he went still when she laughed. She did not see the thing that moved through his expression before it was carefully, completely removed. When the walkthrough ended and the SEO group team began filtering out, the rain had arrived. A steady, gray, mid-afternoon rain that made the walk to the parking structure a genuine inconvenience. Tiffany was reorganizing her bag and mentally running through her next 3 tasks when Damien Luo appeared beside her and said, with easy practicality, that he was heading to the structure anyway, and she was welcome to walk with him since neither of them had an umbrella. It was 4 minutes. It was logistically practical. She walked with him. In those 4 minutes, he asked about her background, listened with real attention when she answered, and told her that Luo Enterprises had a brand events division that was expanding and that had, from what he understood, been looking for someone with exactly her profile for the better part of 6 months. He reached into his jacket and handed her a card. "Not a pitch," he said, "just information." She took the card without responding to it. She tucked it into her coat pocket, said a professional goodbye, and walked to her car. She thought about the card for approximately 40 seconds on the drive back to the office, and then she put it in the same mental drawer as the coffee she never commented on and the 3 transfer requests that never went through, and she went back to her run-of-show document. What she did not know was that Jae-won's driver, who had been waiting in the structure, had seen the walk from the venue entrance to the elevator, had seen the conversation, had seen the card, and had mentioned it, because that was the nature of closed professional ecosystems and the people who moved through them, in the way that details mentioned to the wrong person always eventually found their way to the person they were most likely to affect. Tiffany noticed the change the next morning. Not dramatically, not in any way she could have pointed to and named cleanly in a single sentence. But she had spent 14 months learning the texture of how Jae-won Seo operated, and something in that texture had shifted overnight in a way that was small and precise, and to someone paying the kind of attention she paid, entirely unmistakable. The emails came stripped of the brief notations he usually included, not cold exactly, just absent of the small professional warmth she had not realized she relied on until it wasn't there. A Tuesday planning meeting that she had been included in for 3 months running had her name quietly removed from the calendar invitation. When she entered a room where he was already present, he did not look up. Not dismissively, not rudely, just not at all. It was the absence of something that had always been there, and the absence had a shape, and the shape felt, to Tiffany Monroe, be it like a conclusion she hadn't been consulted on. She sat at her desk on Thursday morning and ran through the possibilities with the same methodical clarity she applied to event logistics. She had not done anything wrong. She had attended a walkthrough, spoken professionally with a man who happened to be her employer's competitor, walked through a parking structure in the rain, and accepted a business card. None of those things were violations of any policy, professional or personal. None of them were things she owed an explanation for. She told herself it didn't matter. And for the first time in 14 months, the rule felt like it was working against her instead of for her. The gala evening arrived on Saturday in the way that event nights always arrived for Tiffany, as a long, controlled sequence of decisions and adjustments, most of which nobody at the event would ever know had been necessary. She was there 4 hours before the first guest, moving through her checklist with the focused calm of someone who had prepared for every version of this night and was simply executing the one that was actually happening. The space looked the way she had designed it to look, warm and intentional, the kind of atmosphere that made people feel that someone had thought carefully about their experience, which was exactly what had happened. The floral arrangements along the head table were a deep dramatic red that she had specifically requested from the florist after 3 rounds of samples. The conversation areas to the left of the main room filled naturally as guests arrived, the way she had predicted they would. She moved through the evening as she always did, present everywhere, visible nowhere, the operational center of a room that was functioning so smoothly that the people in it could simply be in it. Damien Luo arrived as a registered industry guest. She had known he would. His name was on the confirmed list, had been for 2 weeks, and she had noted it and made no changes, because her job was to coordinate the event, not to curate the guest list based on her employer's professional rivalries. He found her twice during the evening. The first time was brief, a professional acknowledgement, a comment on the space that was genuine and specific. The second time was near the end of the formal program, and he asked whether she had thought about the card. She told him she'd been busy. He said he understood, and that the offer stood, and that he hoped she'd consider it seriously. Both times were brief. Both times were observable to anyone in the room who was paying attention to Tiffany Monroe's movements. Jae-won was paying attention. She didn't see his face either time, but she felt, with the particular sensitivity of someone who had spent 14 months in careful proximity to a specific person, that she was being watched, and not in the way she was used to being watched at events, not the monitoring of a director reviewing his team's performance. Something different, something that had weight to it. She didn't look. She kept working. The event ended well. It ended exactly as she had planned it would. The last guests moved toward the exit just after 10, and the SEO group team began their wrap-up, and one by one they said their goodnights and left. Until it was Tiffany and 2 venue staff members, and the quiet that comes after a successful evening when the work is still not quite finished. She was using the main conference table near the back of the event space as her operations station, her laptop, her printed run of show, her vendor folders, a half-finished bottle of water. One of the venue staff was carefully disassembling the head table floral arrangement when the stand shifted unexpectedly, and the cascade of red roses came down sideways, and petals went across the conference table and across the floor in a wide, scattered arc. The venue staff member apologized. Tiffany said it was fine. She looked at the petals across her workspace and across the floor around her chair, and she was too tired and too finished to move them. So she sat down and let them be where they were and began entering her post-event notes. She was not thinking about Jae-won Seo. She was thinking about her notes and the vendor feedback form she needed to file, and whether she had left her spare charger at the office or at home. She heard his footsteps before she heard his voice. She recognized them because of course she did, because that was the kind of thing 14 months of close professional proximity does to a person's awareness. And she looked up. He was standing in the doorway of the conference area, suit jacket still on. The evening's rain had left the window glass behind him gray and streaked with light. He looked at her for a moment, across the scattered petals and the low lamp in the quiet of the emptied room. And then he said, "My office, now." Not loudly, not harshly. Just that. And then he turned and walked toward the elevator. Tiffany sat still for 3 seconds. Then she closed her laptop, picked up her bag, and followed him. His office was on the 14th floor. She had been in it hundreds of times. She knew its dimensions, knew the layout of his desk and the shelves behind it, knew the view of the city through the rain-covered glass. She had never, in any of those hundreds of visits, stood in it the way she stood in it now, at 10:47 on a Saturday night, with rose petals probably still caught in her braids, knowing that whatever was about to happen was not going to be professional in any clean or manageable sense. He closed the door. He did not sit down. He stood with both palms flat on his desk, leaning slightly forward. And he looked at her in the specific way that she had spent 14 months not quite being able to describe to herself, and he said, "Who were you with?" Not, "What did he say?" Not, "What did he want?" Not, "Is there something I should know, or something I should understand, or something you'd like to explain?" Just that. Simple. Direct. Personal in a way that had no professional justification. Tiffany looked at him. She had prepared, in some quiet corner of herself, for a performance review, for a conversation about optics or professional boundaries or the perception of fraternizing with a competitor. She had prepared her answers. She had her facts. She was ready to be measured and clear and entirely correct. She was not prepared for the particular quietness of that question, or for what it cost him to ask it, or for the way it landed in her chest like something she had already known was coming and had been refusing to look at directly. She told him the truth. All of it. The walkthrough, the rain, the conversation that lasted 4 minutes, the card in her coat pocket. She told him that Damien Luo had approached her, that she had not sought him out, that she had not responded to the offer, that she had not called the number on the card or thought about it for more than 40 seconds. She said it all cleanly and without apology, because none of it required one. And then she stopped preparing what to say and said the thing that had been pressing against the inside of her chest for 3 days. "You've been watching me for 14 months, Jae-won. and you've never once asked me anything. Not one thing that wasn't about a project or a deadline or an event brief. You removed me from a meeting this week without a conversation. You walked past me twice yesterday without looking up. And now it's almost 11 o'clock on a Saturday, and you're asking me who I was with. She paused. She kept her voice level. She kept her spine straight. So what exactly do you think you're entitled to right now? The room was quiet in a way that rooms only get when something important has been said, and both people in them know it. Jae-won did not move. His jaw tightened. She saw it, the small shift of muscle, the thing he did when he was processing something he hadn't expected to have to process. His eyes held hers for a long moment, steady and dark and entirely unreadable in most of the ways she knew how to read him. And then something happened in his expression that she had never once seen in 14 months. He looked away, not dismissively, not with irritation. He looked down, just briefly, just for the span of a breath, and in that brief downward glance, Tiffany Monroe finally saw the thing she'd been refusing to see for over a year. It was there. Plain and real and entirely too large to have been professional oversight or managerial diligence or any of the other clean explanations she had been constructing and renewing and maintaining with such careful effort. It had always been there. She picked up her bag. She held it with both hands, steadily, because she needed something steady. She looked at him one more time, at the set of his shoulders and the line of his jaw and the man standing behind 14 months of precise, meticulous, careful distance, and then she walked to the door and opened it and left. She did not run. She walked the way she always walked, like someone who knows where she's going, and she rode the elevator down 14 floors, and she pushed through the lobby and out into the rain, and she walked to her car and got in and sat there for a long moment in the quiet. The rose petals were still scattered across his desk. She didn't think about what she was feeling on the drive home. That was intentional. There was a certain kind of emotional territory that needed to be approached on sleep, and not at 11 p.m. on a Saturday after a 6-hour event. And Tiffany Monroe had enough self-knowledge to understand where her limits were. She ate something when she got home. She showered. She slept. Bish. She returned to work on Monday morning the way she always returned to work, prepared, professional, and entirely committed to the position that her personal interior life was not available for public consumption. The office received her the way it always did. Her desk was where she left it. Her inbox had the weekend accumulation of vendor confirmations and partnership correspondence. She opened her laptop and began her post-event report and told herself, firmly and clearly and without ambiguity, that Saturday night had happened and was now in the past, and that she was a professional adult with excellent time management skills, and she was going to keep it there. The first thing she noticed was the meeting invitation, not its presence, its return. The Tuesday planning meeting that had disappeared from her calendar 8 days ago was back. Her name reinstated in the attendee list with no notation or explanation. She stared at it for a moment. She accepted it without comment because she was Tiffany Monroe and she was professional, and she moved on to the next item in her inbox. The second thing she noticed was the vendor update waiting in her project folder. The contract complication that had been stalling one of her Q4 events for 3 weeks. A venue partnership dispute that had been caught in a back and forth between two legal teams and had shown no sign of resolving, had been marked resolved over the weekend. No explanation in the file, no paper trail she could identify. The dispute had simply concluded in favor of the terms she needed. She sat with that for a moment. Now she thought about who had the kind of professional reach to make that happen quickly and quietly on a weekend. She thought about whose office had a light on past midnight on multiple weeknights in the past month. She moved on. She was professional. She had a post-event report to finish. On Tuesday, she attended the planning meeting. Jae-won ran it the way he always ran meetings, concisely, without excess, covering exactly what needed to be covered. He referred to her work twice, both times accurately, and with the quiet specificity that indicated he had reviewed the relevant materials. He did not single her out. He did not avoid her. He treated her with the same professional directness he applied to everyone in the room. She responded in kind. She was clear and prepared and contributed what she needed to contribute. And when the meeting ended, she gathered her things and left without lingering. She was almost back to her desk when her colleague Priya appeared beside her and fell into step with the particular energy of someone carrying information they have been waiting for a reasonable moment to share. Priya was one of the few people in the office whose company Tiffany genuinely enjoyed. She was perceptive and direct, and had the useful quality of only passing along information that actually merited passing along. So when she said in a low and unhurried voice, "Can I tell you something about the walkthrough?" Tiffany listened. What Priya knew gathered from a contact at the venue management company who had been present for a separate conversation. Was this. Damien Luo's appearance at the SEO Group pre-event walkthrough on Thursday had not been a coincidence or a scheduling overlap. He had known when the walkthrough was scheduled. He had known who the lead coordinator was. He had specifically positioned his own venue meeting to overlap with the walkthrough's end time, and he had specifically sought Tiffany out by name. His interest in her work was genuine, Priya said. There was no question that the Luo Enterprises events position was real. But the timing, the visibility of the interaction, the walk through the parking structure in the rain, those had been calculated. Not against Tiffany. She wasn't the target. But she had been placed on the board as a piece, and the move had been designed specifically to land in the peripheral vision of one person. Damien Luo had known that Jae-won was in that room during the walkthrough. He had known Jae-won would see the interaction and likely hear about the parking structure. He was not interested in unsettling Tiffany Monroe. He was interested in unsettling Jae-won Seo 3 days before a major contract vote, and the most efficient way to do that, based on information he had gathered through the kind of network that powerful men maintain for exactly this kind of purpose, was to stand next to Tiffany and make it visible. Priya said all of this carefully, watching Tiffany's face. Tiffany walked the rest of the way back to her desk and sat down. She thought about the walkthrough. She replayed it, the conversation, the genuine quality of Damien's attention, the smart questions, the card. She replayed the parking structure and the rain and the 4 minutes and the way he had said, not a pitch, just information, in a voice that had been so smooth and so practiced that she had registered it as sincere. She thought about the coffee on her desk on event mornings, the 3 transfer requests that never went through, the light on past midnight, the meetings restored without explanation, the vendor dispute resolved on a weekend. She thought about Jae-won standing in the walk-through venue with his hands in his pockets, going still. She thought about his face when he looked away. She sat at her desk for a long moment without opening anything or clicking anything or doing the 17 tasks that were waiting for her attention. She simply sat and thought, and felt the particular sensation of understanding arriving at a volume that made the room seem briefly louder than it was. Damien had made a chess move. She had been the piece. And Jae-won Seo, the most controlled man she had ever worked for, had broken his own silence over it in the emptied quiet of an event venue on a Saturday night with rose petals scattered across the floor. She thought about that, the weight of it, what it meant about the 14 months before it. On Wednesday morning, she arrived at her desk and found a single document placed precisely at the center of it, not in her inbox, not emailed, physically placed on paper, the way things were placed when someone walked to a desk and put something on it intentionally. It was a formal promotion proposal, director of brand events. The position came with a remit that was, on paper, exactly what she would have designed for herself, expanded authority over the full event portfolio, a direct line to executive planning, the ability to build a small coordination team under her direction. The salary attached to it made her go very still for a moment. There was no cover note, no email to accompany it, no name at the bottom of the proposal, but in the margin of the second page, where someone had made a small handwritten correction to a budget line, she recognized the handwriting. She had seen it on enough documents, on enough brief notations in the margins of her own work returned with his review, that it was as identifiable to her as a signature. She read the proposal once, then she read it again. Then she set it down on her desk and looked at the wall for a moment and thought about what it meant to be offered exactly what you had been working toward, in exactly this way, at exactly this moment, by exactly this person. She had not resolved anything. She had walked out of an office on Saturday night with more questions than answers, and the questions had not gotten smaller since then. They had gotten more precise, which was somehow more demanding. She knew things now that she hadn't known Saturday night. She understood the shape of the last 3 weeks in a way she hadn't on Monday morning, but understanding the shape of something and knowing what to do with it were not the same thing, and Tiffany Monroe had not gotten where she was by making decisions before she was ready to make them well. She was still sitting with the proposal, still thinking, when the sound of footsteps registered in her awareness, and she knew them before she looked up, and she looked up anyway. Jae-won was standing in the doorway of her office. He was not in the room. He was precisely at the threshold, present but not entering, and he was looking at her with the expression she had finally learned to read, the one that had been there all along underneath the precision and the quiet and the exact professional distance. He looked at the proposal on her desk. Then he looked at her. The silence between them lasted several seconds, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that happens when two people are both aware of something and neither of them is pretending otherwise for the first time. Then he said, "I owe you an explanation. Not about Damien. About the 14 months before him." Tiffany did not move. She held the proposal lightly in both hands and looked at the man in her doorway and felt the full weight of everything he had just acknowledged, not just the explanation he was offering, but the 14 months it covered. Every cup of coffee, every event he stood in the back of, every transfer request that never went through, every moment of careful, deliberate, costly distance. She did not speak. She wasn't ready. And he seemed to understand that because he nodded once, the way he nodded at the end of a meeting when he was satisfied that the important thing had been said and the rest could wait, and said, "When you're ready." And then he turned and walked back down the hall, and she heard his office door close, soft and precise, the way he did everything. No, Tiffany Monroe looked down at the proposal in her hands, Director of Brand Events, 14 months of exactness. A question asked at 10:47 p.m. on a Saturday night over rose petals and rain. She looked at the empty doorway. She thought about her rule, the one she had maintained with such careful effort for over a year. Don't let it matter. She set the proposal down on her desk, and for the first time in 14 months, she didn't tell herself it didn't matter. Because it did. It always had. And she was finally, quietly, entirely done pretending otherwise. The question now was what she was going to do with that, and she didn't have the answer yet. But for the first time, she wasn't in a hurry to put it away. Tiffany Monroe turned back to her desk, opened her laptop, and began the work of figuring out what came next. And down the hall, behind a closed door, she had a feeling that Jae-won Seo was doing exactly the same thing. Tiffany is standing at the edge of something that has no professional name and no safe answer. And Jae-won Seo, the man who memorized her coffee order and never once said her name like it was just a name, is finally ready to speak. If you want part 2, you already know what to do. Subscribe and don't go far.